guys, welcome back. It's Miss Hofeld. I'm getting excited to read our next few chapters of You Go First. Before I started reading, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my day. I know it's been kind of weird, everyone being home so much, so some of the things I did to try and have a fun day and keep some things normal was I woke up, I had my normal breakfast, I did a little workout. I watched a YouTube video of some yoga and I did that, which felt really good. And then I still did my normal morning routine. I took a shower and brushed my teeth and washed my face and did all of the normal stuff I do in a day. I cleaned up a little bit around my house, which felt good, and then I started a puzzle, which has been kind of fun and exciting. So I'm taking a little break from all of that to read to you guys today. We're going to read chapters 3 and 4. Each chapter goes back and forth again between Ben and Charlotte, so we'll hear a little bit from each of them again today. I noticed some of you had some good questions and comments, so I'm hoping we learn a little bit more, and at the end I'll come up with a question if you guys want to keep answering and following along, and maybe we'll answer some of your questions today too. So we're going to get started. This chapter is called Starfish. Rabbit hole. Sea stars' vital organs are located in the arms. If they lose an arm, they have an ability to grow it back. So if they get hurt, they have the potential to grow into something new. Lizards can regenerate too. In fact, reptiles are some of the world's most resilient animals. Charlotte was excited. She was going to dissect a starfish. The impending assignment had taken her down several rabbit holes. Starfish led to marine invertebrates. Marine invertebrates led to sea anemones. Sea anemones led to fossil records. But as she followed her mother to the recovery room, heart thumping with her footsteps, an image sprang into her head and she couldn't shake it out. The starfish, a scalpel, and her hand on both. And then the starfish was gone, and it was her father instead. Charlotte, her mother said, once she realized her daughter wasn't at her heels. Mrs. Lockhart stepped in the sterile hallway of the hospital and turned around, both eyebrows raised. Charlotte hadn't realized that she'd stopped walking. Her mother was several feet ahead, now obediently following Dr. Ansari, the surgeon. "Are you okay?" Charlotte discovered that her voice had disappeared. Charlotte told her father about the starfish dissection the week before, how excited she was, and how they'd work on frogs and earthworms later in the year. "Sounds rather gruesome," he'd said. "Not unkindly, just curious. You've certainly inherited your mother's left brain." She had wanted to tell him that the right brain versus left brain concept was a myth. In actuality, each side of the brain worked together, like a team. Math and science weren't limited only to the left brain, just like creativity and communication weren't only from the right brain. So there weren't really left brain people or right brain people. There were just thinking people. But that would have only proved his point. So she continued talking about starfish, and her father eventually got around to talking about seascapes, specifically those painted by Gauguin. When she was a little girl, he took her to the Philadelphia Museum of Art to show her a Gauguin. She couldn't remember the name of it. Something about grapes in France or something. "Just wait until you see it, Charlotte," he told her, beaming. At the museum, he stood and stared at the painting, like he wanted to become part of it. There were 2 women in the painting. Or was it 3? Charlotte stared too. She thought, what's the big deal? She scratched the back of her left leg with her right foot. She leaned on one hip, then the other. She asked if they could go home. When she was upstairs in her room, she wondered if she'd been born into the wrong family. She used to pretend that she and Bridget could switch places. Bridget loved art, just like Charlotte's dad. She even wanted to be an artist. So Charlotte imagined that Bridget could become a Lockhart and Charlotte could be a Macaulay. She would play with the Macaulay's dog, Sergeant, and wouldn't have to hear about Gauguin again. "Sounds rather gruesome," he'd said. And now he was on the other side of the hospital wall. Recently dissected. Charlotte's arms erupted in goosebumps. Mrs. Lockhart told Dr. Ansari to wait a moment. then closed the space that Charlotte had created between them. "Do you want to wait out here?" she asked. "You don't have to go in." "But," said Charlotte. "But what?" "But what if he asks where I am?" "He's probably half asleep," she said. "And if he asks, I'll tell him I asked you to wait outside." She paused. "Okay?" Charlotte was silent for a moment, then nodded. When her mother and Dr. Ansari were out of sight, Charlotte still stood there, in the middle of the hall, staring at the door. Next chapter is chapter 4. It's called Life According to Ben, Part 2. The opposite of evolution was de-evolution, complex species reverting to simpler forms. It was a contested and controversial concept, but it fit Ben's parents perfectly. They had once been simple, single individuals. Then they got married and became a complex unit. Now they were regressing to their simpler form, no longer a family, 3 single units. Ben stretched across his Ravenclaw comforter. His bedroom door was locked for the first time in when? Forever, maybe. His phone rested on his chest. The first thing he wanted to do was call someone. That's what you do when you get bad news, right? You call a friend, they make it better. They tell you that things will be okay. They say, "I've been there too." But when Ben scrolled through his contacts, he discovered that he only spoke to 2 people on a regular basis. His parents. In elementary school, he'd had Adam and Kyle. They weren't his friends exactly, but the 3 of them sat together at lunch and sometimes talked before and after school. They'd never been to one another's house or anything, but Adam and Kyle liked to read and didn't mind hearing Ben obsess about Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, even though they all disagreed on various plot points. The worst thing that had happened was the time Ben caught Sherry Bertrand copying off Kyle's spelling paper. He told Mrs. Havisham. Sherry flunked the test, and her parents had to come and pick her up. Yes, Ben felt bad when she was carted off in tears. Maybe he was the tattletale the kids, including Kyle, accused him of being. But it wasn't right for Sherry to lift the answers so effortlessly when everyone else in the class worked hard for them. Well, except for Ben, all he needed was to hear a word, and he usually knew how to spell it. But still. Anyway, that seemed like a million years ago. Lannister Elementary was one of several schools that fed into Lannister Middle, and Adam and Kyle had disappeared somewhere in the wide gulf. And they weren't exactly the kind of friends he could call and talk to about his parents' marital de-evolution. There was no one, except Lottie. "How pathetic," he said out loud to the ceiling. What kind of 11-year-old didn't have anyone to call with big announcements? What if he had won the lottery? Then what? Who would he call? There wouldn't even be anyone to tell him congratulations. His grandparents lived in the Midwest. He only saw them at Christmas. And what would Christmas look like now? What if he won the Nobel Prize one day, or something, and wanted to tell someone? Then what? De-evolution. Maybe that was his life, gradually devolving from a boy with 2 parents and 2 sort of friends to a boy with no parents and no friends at all. Maybe he could become a brilliant hermit, living off the grid with no modern conveniences except his mind. He'd solve complex mathematical problems in his 1-room cabin in the wilds of Ann Arbor, assuming Ann Arbor had wilds. He could get a dog and name it Snape, or if it's a girl, Professor McGonagall. And he and Professor McGonagall would have to walk 2 miles into town just to use the phone and call his parents. "You wouldn't move back to Michigan, so I did it myself," he would say. Only he'd have to make 2 long-distance calls now instead of 1. And where would he even get the money? Life was so complicated. Ben picked up his phone to text Lottie. You can see on this page there's a text conversation that I'll read to you guys. "Do you think our generation relies too much on digital communication?" "Never thought about it. Why?" I was just thinking, and it occurred to me that our language has devolved in recent years because we rely too much on digital devices to communicate, like social media and phones and whatnot. I realize neither of us is on social media, having decided it had the potential to eat away at our respective schedules and compromise our academic performance. But we do spend a lot of time on our phones, particularly texting and playing Scrabble and so forth. So I was just thinking, maybe we should try to evolve our rivalry. Despite the fact that you live in Pennsylvania and I live in Nowheresville, despite the 1,000 plus miles between us, we can still communicate, verbally rather than relying on our handheld modes of communication. You know? Huh? Do you want to talk on the phone? Okay. Ben sat up in bed, took a deep breath, and dialed Lottie's number before he could think too much about it. If he did, he would have thought, this is the first time I've ever called a girl. Or, I'm talking to a 7th grader that I've never met. She answered right away. Hello? Oh, said Ben. Hey, it's Ben. I figured. So, Ben picked at a thread on his comforter. He wondered what his parents were doing. Were they still in the kitchen? So, he wanted to tell her everything about the announcement, his theories of his parental de-evolution, even about becoming a brilliant hermit, and maybe the part about him not having anyone to call when he won the Nobel Prize or the lottery. But now that they were actually on the phone, he discovered that none of those words would come out of his mouth. It seemed like a lot to unload on someone on your very first phone conversation. What are you doing? Asked Ben. It sounded like she was in a wide open space, like a library or something. Nothing. Just sitting, I guess. Were you busy? No. Me neither. So what made you want to talk on the phone? Oh, well, I kind of had something I wanted to say. Really? What? He and his parents had gone to the Grand Canyon once, when he was in 3rd or 4th grade. They'd stood side by side and stared into the big open void, none of them saying anything. It felt like the sky was 1,000,000 miles wide, and they were standing at a cliff in front of it. They'd driven there in his parents' SUV, and sang most of the way until they ran out of songs and settled into their seats to watch the world go by. On the way back, they listened to an audiobook of Bridge to Terabithia. Ben thought of that trip now. It hit him suddenly, like a slap in the face. His eyes watered. Speak freely, his father had said. Lottie was silent on the other line. Ben heard something like an announcement over a PA system. Maybe she was at a train station or something. He wished he was at a train station because it would mean he was going somewhere. Anywhere. Ben said, back to one-word sentences. After a long pause, Lottie said, Are you still there? Yes. And then it spilled out of his mouth. From where, he didn't know. I'm running for student council. He'd pass the posters every day in his new middle school. Make a run for student council. Register today. Make a difference. And each time he thought, hey, maybe I will. But then he'd forget about it just as quickly. It must have nestled in the edge of his brain somewhere all this time. That's great, said Lottie. Good luck. Thanks, Ben replied. Well, I guess that's it for now, unless you have any announcements, too. Any big news going on? Lottie was quiet. I'm dissecting a starfish soon. That sounds exciting. Yeah, I guess. Okay, well, talk to you later? Yeah, talk to you later. After they hung up, Ben looked at his list of recent calls, and there it was, Lottie Locke. Now I have someone to call when I win the lottery, he said. All right, guys, that was the end of chapters 3 and 4. I do have 2 questions for you before we move on. One is a question about where do you think Lottie was when she got the phone call from Ben. Lottie is also known as Charlotte, or one of our main characters. Where do you think she was? It sounded like there was wide open spaces. It sounded like there was announcements going on in the background based on what we know about her and her story so far. Try to leave a comment guessing where you think she is right in that moment. And then my other question is, were Lottie, also known as Charlotte, and Ben truthful with each other? Did they tell each other everything that's really going on in their lives? Or do you think they purposely left out some information? And why do you think they didn't share everything? So I know that's a lot of questions. You can scroll back through the video, listen to a little bit again, listen to the questions again if you want, and then again leave some comments down below answering the questions or just your thoughts so far on the book or how you're enjoying it so far. Tomorrow I'll come back. I have to look at those chapters again, but I'm pretty sure we'll be reading both chapters 5 and 6 if they're as quick as these past few have been. So I'm looking forward to it. I'll have that video up again. Tonight I'll have it up around 6, and then I'll try to shoot for that time every day so that if you're hoping to listen to this before bed, you can do that. All right, guys, I hope you have a good rest of your day. I'll see you all tomorrow, and I'm excited to hear more about Ben and Lottie. All right, talk to you later. Bye.